Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this session in the 8th Annual Higher Education Women's Leadership Summit. I'm Kim Goff-Crews, Secretary and Vice President of Student Life at Yale University in the United States. I am so delighted to be with you today because I'm really intrigued by the conference theme this year, Visions of Success, particularly as that success relates to women in leadership. My personal mission or vision statement is this: to educate, enlighten, and evolve. I follow this mission statement personally, but I also work to set up systems that help other people become educated, enlightened, and evolved, but in ways that are meaningful to them. One of the most effective and important ways I've found to do this is to use our voices, to speak up. Telling your story and using your voice will indeed change the world and higher education leadership. So while many women are being urged by Sheryl Sandberg to lean in, and I support that message too, I'd like to add this phrase as another essential one in our leadership repertoire: speak up. But it isn't always easy. In fact, when our current university president was inaugurated, we had several women university presidents who had been provosts at Yale talk about the nature of the presidency and higher education, particularly from the viewpoint of being a woman. Judith Rodin, who was Yale Graduate School Dean and Provost before serving for a decade as President of the University of Pennsylvania, shared this really interesting story about her motivation to speak up. I'm going to show you a slide about a New Yorker cartoon that she keeps on her desk. It's an image of a conference table with a meeting of all men and just one woman. I know some of you have been in that situation or at least seen it. The caption reads, "That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it." Rodin's advice to all of us: this will happen to you at some point in your career, but don't be defeated by it. Today, I'm going to look at some of the programs, initiatives, and ideas that have been getting women to speak up in the classroom, in the lab, and in every area and at every level of higher education. Then, I'm going to look at some of the ways to cultivate leadership in our environment. And finally, I'll look at some principles I've found to be essential to developing oneself as a leader who can speak up with purpose, with passion, and with impact. In my current position, I serve in 3 capacities, and in every one of those capacities, I have some role in cultivating and supporting leadership. As Secretary to the Board of Trustees at Yale, I support the work of the highest level of alumni volunteers from across the world: business persons, entrepreneurs, academics, artists, nonprofit executives, and the like, so that they can exercise leadership as they oversee the long-term strategic direction of our institution. As an officer at Yale, I work closely with my fellow officers and other senior administrators, as well as faculty and alumni volunteers, to design and implement broad-based programs and initiatives. And then, as a senior student affairs administrator on our campus, I work closely with student leaders in the undergraduate, graduate, and professional student body. In essence, my responsibility at Yale now, and actually throughout my entire career, which is now almost 25 years, is not only to be a leader, it's also to be actively supportive and to help develop the broadest spectrum of leaders in the university setting. And again, one of the most effective ways I've found to do this is to speak up, to use my voice, and by doing so, help others use and develop and share their knowledge and their ideas for the good of the university and beyond it. I do want to alert you that as I'm talking about some of the initiatives that I'm most interested in sharing with you, that I will talk about initiatives that impact women leaders, but also impact minority students and indigenous people who are students, faculty, and staff. I find that some of the roadblocks and the keys to success are similar. I myself am both a minority person and a woman, and that makes a difference when I speak up and in what I speak to. I have certainly found that distinction and connection between the two parts of myself are something to pay attention to in my own life. The programs and initiatives I find most successful are those that help us address a challenge for one community with the potential to bridge challenges for multiple communities. I want to start by providing a very quick snapshot of where we are in the U.S. with women in higher education leadership. Some of the news is really great. 50% of those getting doctoral degrees, usually needed for leadership positions, are women. The number of women presidents across higher education has jumped by 160%, 160% from 1986 to 2011. In 2014, almost half of the newly appointed provosts and 42% of new deans were women. In fact, Yale has hired a number of new deans for our academic units, most of whom are women and one who is a minority. But despite this progress, the total number of women leaders in U.S. higher ed is stuck at just 30%. The numbers are worse for women of color. As an example, Black women hold only 2% of tenured positions. Now, I looked at reports from Catalyst, which is an organization whose mission is to accelerate progress for women through workplace inclusion. And they report that Australia has similar circumstances in higher education. The report states that women hold only about 30% of positions of above senior lecturer, and that there's a gender pay gap of about 15%. It really is important for us to be having this discussion about how we can become our best, and by doing so, help our institutions evolve to what we need them to be. Let's start in the classroom. Here in the U.S., we've all observed that women students don't speak up as often in class, and the data bear this observation out. Many universities are working to correct that, on the premise that if we make classrooms more inclusive, so that it's easier for all of our students to participate, women and minority students in particular, these students will help create a much richer learning environment and be prepared for life beyond the classroom, as leaders in a variety of areas: business, politics, and of course academia. At Stanford and Yale law schools, smaller class sizes help make it more possible for women to speak up. In fact, a Yale Law School study showed that when faculty made an effort to cold call on women in the classroom, participation rates became more equal. Having experienced being cold called in the law school class when I was at Yale, I can tell you that while uncomfortable, you definitely prepare to give your opinion early and often. The Harvard Business School in 2010 and 2013, or through 2010 and 2013, launched a huge and highly publicized initiative that had participation in speaking up as a central goal. The dean of the business school at that time decided to, as he said, remake gendered relations in the classroom. A key focus was classroom participation, a highly subjective measurement that made up 50% of students' grades. As in law school, male students typically spoke up much more in class. Women students, it was described, quote, sat frozen or spoke tentatively. The business school faculty focused their efforts in several ways. A New York Times article noted that they lectured about respect and civility, expanded efforts like coaching on how to raise hands in class more assertively, and added stenographers in every class so professors would no longer rely on possibly biased memories of who had said what. By graduation, the school had become a markedly better place for female students. The gender grade gap had vaporized so fast that no one could quite say how it happened. Yale also focuses on making sure the classrooms are inclusive. In fact, our Center for Teaching and Learning has ample resources to help professors hear more voices in the classroom. The center's website explains how diversity can manifest in a classroom setting and offers documents with tips on how to promote an inclusive environment for students. One resource provides a list of situations related to diversity that could arise in a classroom, situations that might be difficult for teachers to handle. This document provides teaching fellows and professors the opportunity to practice dealing with a variety of issues related to diversity, so that they are better able to carry out their roles as stimulators of discussion in the classroom. As a university, we also have to be thoughtful about helping faculty strategically develop the communication skills and the platforms they need to convey their knowledge. The ability to be a thought leader and to communicate effectively about your research to the external world is a hallmark of faculty life, particularly that of the public intellectual. In universities, we work all the time with brilliant women, from rocket scientists to business innovators to those developing cures for cancer. But if they can't get their complex thinking out to the public and to their colleagues, they risk being overlooked and undervalued. In 2011, the Yale Women's Faculty Forum joined with the Op-Ed Project to solve that problem through something called the Public Voices Fellowship Program. I'm going to show you a photo of Katie Ornstein, the founder and CEO of the Op-Ed Project. Now here she is, she's showing a sign, and it reads, "Because the stories we tell determine what we think about what happens, which determines what happens next." Now, what that statement signals for me is a powerful message, the message that when we tell our stories, we shape the world. The Public Voices Fellowship pairs journalists with women and underrepresented minority scholars for training and practice at getting their thoughts out there in op-ed pieces, on TV and radio, through social media, and more. Last year, Yale Fellows produced more than 40 op-eds in major publications, interviews, and TEDx videos. Their ideas were fascinating, and they are fascinating, and the quality of the thought leadership shines. They just needed some training on how to speak up, how to use their voices in the public realm. Now, if you can't start such a project at your school, at your individual institution, I really encourage you to consider networking with other schools, either here or elsewhere. Or you can work individually with a communication specialist to find the best way to use your voice. This could be an important investment in your leadership and in your future. We also need to cultivate an environment that makes it possible to speak up and step up. We must create better pipelines that place women in positions that better prepare them for leadership roles. Now, one of the ways we can do this is through the development of well-structured mentorship and leadership development programs. The Princeton Women's Mentorship Network, for instance, is a campus-wide network that connects undergraduate women, graduate students, administrators, and faculty, and creates opportunities to explore issues of leadership and gender. We can also use new models of career management to help us. Polan Sangvi, who is a Yale alum, but also the Executive Director of Career Services at Princeton, posits a new career management model. He says that women can create for themselves a chain of professional support. This goes beyond a mentor, who is someone who you can turn to for advice, to working with a sponsor, someone who remains actively invested in your development throughout your career, someone who is willing to not only help you through certain situations, but to advocate for you on your behalf consistently and introduce you to new opportunities. The same can be done by establishing more of these relationships between women at the top and women in all stages of their careers to create what he would call a cyclical network of mentorship and sponsorship. Now, those of us at the top can also encourage more conscious succession planning with a purposeful intention to look at women and other underrepresented groups. In the U.S., we're facing the majority of presidents in higher education approaching retirement age, along with the baby boomers in all different fields. So there will soon be a huge opportunity to diversify the leadership pool. So by positioning female faculty and female administrators into important roles in the pipeline, we can create a well-established plan to ensure representation at all levels. In my own life and through my work with leaders in higher education, I've identified other skills that help make a difference, particularly for women. The first is this: learn your values and craft your personal mission and vision. Now, I shared my personal vision earlier, but I want to talk to you about the story that's behind that. It begins with my life after law school. I was fairly accomplished. I graduated from Yale College, then Yale Law, and I was a hard worker with a high expectation of myself and others. I had passed the bar and joined a law firm where I practiced bankruptcy law, which is law that governs how institutions and individuals reorganize their assets for a second chance. Now, I had a world-class education, a well-paying job, and I was on a 4-year plan to pay off my student loans. And yet, something wasn't quite right. I felt empty. Something was definitely missing. Despite my education, my service work, and the skill development that I was getting at the time, I actually felt like a failure. I found no meaning in the work that I was doing, and I lacked fulfillment. Even though the path I was on seemed right on paper, it just didn't stir my soul. So instead of ignoring that little voice telling me something wasn't right, I decided to explore where it was coming from and to see what I could do to change it. So I created a course, essentially a course in self-discovery, and I gave myself lots of homework. On the weekends, I went to the library and I read the now classic book, What Color is Your Parachute? I went to career services. I took tests like the Myers-Briggs test and did strength-finding activities to learn more about myself and what I was actually good at and enjoyed. I visited people whom I admired, both for their work and their leadership. I also read books, career books, including When Smart People Fail. I connected with stories of successful people who had undergone a challenge only to learn something crucial about themselves. And in that process, I also looked at the experience that I had had so far as a student and elsewhere, and I figured out what I actually enjoyed doing. At the time, I was also mentoring a young woman who was given the opportunity to go to school, specifically to college, for free if she completed high school. And even though I wasn't fulfilled by the work at the law firm, I actually did enjoy going into the companies in order to understand the business and to think about how they might reorganize. And many of the people I helped were older, uneducated women who were facing the very scary reality of unemployment. As I helped these women and families think through their challenges and plan for their futures, I actually realized how much I enjoyed helping them. I enjoyed helping them find their resiliency and working through the tough situations that they were facing. I encourage many to think about education as a real option and a next step in their lives. So, reflecting on the readings, the results of my StrengthsFinder searches, and the work that I actually enjoyed doing, I began to craft a personal and professional mission statement, which has gone through several iterations, but has been fairly consistent, and I now have it as a three-word mantra. Education, enlightenment, evolution. I believe this process, although lengthy, of learning your values and crafting your personal mission and vision statement is essential to leadership. Because no matter where you are in your leadership journey, you can adapt this process to help clarify and focus that journey and get you to where you want to go. Second, define success for yourself. Now, people all around us are always ready to give us their definitions of success, from numbers of publications you have to appear in to the kind of home you have to buy. But women can define success for ourselves, and we really must. Third, embrace tradition, but defy convention. There's a long history of women leaders we can draw from, and we can see how each practiced this principle in some way. Our grandmothers have wisdom, but we still have to break new ground every day. Anna Marie Kelsay, president of the University of Washington, has defied conventions in multiple ways. She has been at the institution for 30 years and has climbed the ranks, holding positions such as provost, executive vice president, chairs of 2 different departments, and dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And when she became president of Washington, she did not just become its president. She became its first Latina president, its first openly gay president, and its first female president. Quite a feat. Kelsay grew up in Miami, escaping with her family from the Cuban Revolution at the age of 3. She received both a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of Miami, and eventually went on to earn her PhD in psychology from Yale. Not only has Kelsay paved this incredible path for herself, but she has made paving paths for others a priority. Her concentration at Yale, in fact, was in child clinical and community psychology, and she has dedicated much of her work in that field to helping at-risk adolescents, particularly African American and Latino youth, as well as homeless and street youth. Aside from her research career, diversity and closing inequity gaps have been a really important part of her agenda. As university administrator at Washington, Kelsay created a faculty retention toolkit. Some of CalSA's professional development suggestions include educating leaders about issues facing women and minority faculty, and having informal lunches for STEM women faculty. She also offers examples of how one can monitor equity in a university setting in her presentations. CalSA recognizes the importance of leadership and being a woman leader in particular. She manages to keep these priorities in mind while still actively carrying out her research, teaching, and mentoring responsibilities. As she puts it, quote, "I think the importance of being a role model is not at all trivial." CalSA believes that education empowers people and improves not only their lives, but also the lives of the people they touch. And this is especially the case for women because of the special role they continue to play in raising children, whether alone or not. I want to end as I began, by sharing the wisdom of just some of the great women leaders in higher education that Yale has produced. I spoke about the panel discussion of former women university presidents who had also been at Yale that took place at our most recent inauguration. We can learn so much from each other. Allison F. Richard, who served 8 years as Yale's provost and as vice chancellor for the University of Cambridge in England, reflected on how we have many global exchange programs for undergraduates, such as that between Cambridge and MIT. But we often don't see how we as leaders can learn from these. We should try to be more open to testing what we ourselves are doing against what others are doing, she said. Such relationships turn into institutional learning opportunities. They're not just good for students. And as former Penn President Roden points out, with universities being engines for innovation, one of the most important qualities in a leader in higher education today is the ability to take risks, innovating in processes and organizationally. Well, today, business leaders even teach failure as being an essential step in developing business solutions, and successful people take risks. Shouldn't we women allow ourselves this advantage, the ability to fail and to learn from our mistakes? Susan Hockfield, a former Yale provost and president of MIT for 8 years, calls convening power the best part of leadership, and that women should use it as often as possible. She says that my favorite day is being at the table with a bunch of incredibly smart people wrestling with the problem, and someone has an idea no one could have had on their own. Well, today I feel fortunate to be in this room with you, even if it's virtually, with a group of smart people to consider how best to speak up individually and collectively so that we can all increase the number of women in leadership positions in higher education worldwide. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of your questions and your stories and sharing our voices on this important topic. Because this is how we start pushing that 30% figure in higher education leadership to the 50% figure that it really needs to be. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.